When my dad called and said, "Traditions are for parents. You can skip this year," I actually believed him. Every Thanksgiving, every winter dinner, every exhausting reunion had always been his thing. His chance to gather us all under one roof, even when no one wanted to be there. So when he told me I could take a break, I thought maybe, finally, he understood that I needed space. I stayed home that weekend, just me, my quiet apartment, and a box of takeout. I remember lighting a candle, pouring wine, and scrolling through old photos. For the first time in years, I felt free of expectations. No fake smiles, no forced conversations, just peace. Then, around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from my cousin read, "Where are you?" They just started dinner. My heart sank. Dinner? I thought they'd cancelled it. I opened my social media and froze. There it was. A photo my dad had just posted. Everyone around the long wooden table, smiling, laughing, plates full, candles glowing. Everyone except me. My chair was there, empty. A perfect gap between my parents and my brother's wife. And the caption read, "Family, no matter what." My chest tightened. That empty seat wasn't a mistake. It was a message. And that's when I realized this wasn't about skipping tradition. It was about being erased from it. Growing up, our family's traditions were everything to my dad. Thanksgiving, Christmas, even the small ones like Family Pizza Friday. He treated them like sacred rituals. He'd wake up early, cook half the meal himself, and bark orders at the rest of us, like a commander on a mission. My mum went along with it, smiling through the chaos, but I could tell she did it for him, not because she loved it. For Dad, traditions weren't just habits. They were control. When I was a kid, I didn't question it. I actually loved how alive the house felt. The smell of turkey, the chatter, the clinking of glasses. But as I got older, especially after Mum passed away, those gatherings started to feel hollow. The laughter sounded forced. My brother, Ethan, brought his picture-perfect wife, and they treated the dinners like a photo shoot. My dad would toast to family unity, even though half of us weren't speaking by dessert. After Mom's funeral, I tried to keep showing up, for Dad's sake. But every year, something in me cracked a little more. The last time I went, he'd seated me at the far end of the table, right beside a cousin I barely knew. My brother's family sat in the middle, where Mom used to sit. I remember staring at my empty plate, while everyone else talked over me. No one noticed when I left early that night, not even Dad. So when he called this year, his voice unusually soft, and said, "You don't have to come if you don't want to." I took it as kindness. Maybe he was finally seeing how much those dinners hurt. Maybe he understood that I needed to step back to breathe, to heal. I didn't realize then. He wasn't setting me free. He was shutting me out. Looking back now, that call was the start of something I couldn't yet name. Something planned. Because my dad never did anything without a reason. Especially when it came to family. And I was about to learn that even absence could be weaponized. The week after Dad's call, I tried to keep busy. I told myself it was fine. One less awkward dinner, one less reminder of how invisible I'd become. Still, when Thanksgiving weekend rolled around, the silence in my apartment felt heavy. I thought about calling him, maybe dropping by with dessert, but something in his tone during that last call stopped me. It had sounded too final. Then, on Saturday morning, I got a text from my cousin Mia. "Dinner last night looked beautiful. Your dad looked so happy. Ethan gave a really emotional speech. Everyone missed you." My stomach sank. Last night, I blinked at the screen. Thanksgiving was Thursday. Why were they celebrating a day later? I opened social media, scrolling through my brother's wife's posts. And there it was. A long video, perfectly edited. My family gathered around the table. Laughter, candles, wine, even the dog in his ridiculous bow tie. And then I saw it. the dining table I knew so well, the same centerpiece Dad used every year. But one thing was off. My usual seat, the one next to Mom's empty chair, was taken. Ethan's wife sat there, smiling, her hand resting possessively on the tablecloth Mom had embroidered years ago. I kept watching, hoping maybe they'd mention me. A toast, a joke, anything. But they didn't. It was like I'd never existed. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they'd moved the date for convenience. Maybe Dad just forgot to tell me. But as the video went on, my chest tightened. I saw place cards with names written in Dad's careful handwriting. Ethan, Lily, Dad, Grandpa, Aunt Marie, every name except mine. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. I sat there in my apartment, my takeout box growing cold, staring at my phone screen like it could explain why. Then I saw the caption under the post. Family, it's who shows up. My brother had written it, with a heart emoji. The kind of subtle cruelty that doesn't scream, but cuts deep. For the rest of the night, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head, how Dad's tone had shifted when he said, "You can skip this year." How he hadn't said, "We'll miss you," or "We'll celebrate another time." He'd said it like a decision had already been made, like he was crossing me off a list. I told myself I wouldn't care, but lying in bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. That same childhood ache of being left out, of not being chosen. Only this time, it wasn't about a forgotten toy or an ignored drawing on the fridge. It was about family, my family, choosing life without me. And I knew I couldn't let that go. The next morning, I woke up with that same tightness in my chest. The kind that doesn't go away, no matter how many times you tell yourself it's fine. I brewed coffee, but even the smell reminded me of Dad's kitchen. Every sip felt bitter. I scrolled through my phone again, rewatching that video, torturing myself with details no one else would notice. How Dad laughed louder than usual. How my brother leaned in close when making his toast. How everyone looked happy, happier without me. I tried to distract myself with work, laundry, cleaning, anything to keep from thinking about it. But the silence in my apartment was deafening. I had no one to talk to. Friends were busy with their own families. And the one person who used to understand, Mom, was gone. I'd lost her years ago, but somehow, this made her absence ache more than ever. By the third day, I cracked. I called Dad. It went to voicemail. I hung up before leaving a message. Then, hours later, he texted back a single line. "Hope you're doing well, kiddo." No apology. No mention of the dinner. Just polite distance. Like I was a stranger he bumped into at a store. That's when the memories started bleeding in. All the times he'd said, "Traditions matter," when I was growing up. How he'd insisted that family always came first. I remembered him scolding me at 16 for missing Christmas Eve because I had a fever, saying, "You show up for family no matter what." So why didn't that rule apply to him now? It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was confusion, then anger. I kept replaying old Thanksgivings in my head, realizing how much of them had revolved around control. Where we sat, what we wore, what we said in our toasts. Maybe I'd mistaken routine for love all those years. Maybe Dad's traditions weren't about togetherness. They were about him being the center. That thought burned, because deep down, I still wanted his approval. I wanted to believe he cared enough to explain, but instead, all I got was silence. That night, I drove past my childhood home. The lights were still on, faint through the curtains. My brother's car was in the driveway. I sat there in my own car, engine idling, staring at the window that used to be mine. A shadow passed by inside. Dad, carrying plates to the sink, smiling as Ethan followed him. For a second, I imagined walking up to the door, knocking and asking, "Why didn't you want me there?" But I didn't. I just sat there, watching through glass, realizing that sometimes family doesn't need to kick you out. They just stop letting you in. I drove home in silence, tears blurring the road. I'd thought I was strong enough to handle being left out. But now I knew. This wasn't just about a skipped dinner. It was about finally seeing the truth. Maybe I'd never really had a place at that table to begin with. A few days later, I got an email from my aunt, Dad's sister. She rarely reached out, so I almost ignored it. But when I opened it, her words made me stop breathing for a moment. I heard what happened. Come by this weekend. There's something you should know. I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to dig deeper. I'd already been burned once. But curiosity, and maybe the smallest flicker of hope, pushed me to go. When I arrived at her place, she greeted me with the warmest hug I'd had in months. No judgment, no questions, just quiet understanding. We sat on her porch with mugs of tea, the sky dimming to gold. She didn't waste time. Your dad called me the night of the dinner, she said. He told me you weren't coming, said you wanted space. My chest tightened. What? She nodded sadly. He said you'd been distant lately, focused on work, and that you told him not to invite you. I thought it didn't sound like you, but her voice trailed off. He seemed sure. For a long moment, I couldn't even speak. The betrayal hit in slow waves. Dad hadn't just excluded me. He'd rewritten the story to make it my fault. And everyone believed him. My aunt reached for my hand. He's not the same since your mom passed. He clings to control because it's the only thing he has left. It's not right, but maybe it's all he knows. Her words softened the anger I'd been carrying, turning it into something heavier. Sorrow. I realized this wasn't just about one dinner, one missed invite. It was about years of unspoken grief, guilt, and a father who couldn't handle losing the person who used to keep the family together. That night, as I drove home, I passed the same streets I'd driven down so many times before. But they felt different now, quieter, like the world was holding its breath. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt ready to stop waiting for an invitation that might never come. When I got home, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was an old photo of all of us from Thanksgiving years ago. Mom, Dad, Ethan, and me. All smiling like nothing could ever change. I stared at it for a long time, then tucked it into my bag. Not because I wanted to hold on, but because I needed to remember who we used to be before everything fell apart. Then I started planning something small. My own version of tradition. Something honest. Something that didn't depend on anyone's approval. I sent a few texts to friends, inviting them over for dinner next week. Nothing fancy. Just warmth, laughter, and a place where no one would ever feel like their seat could be taken away. As I hit send on the last message, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in months. Maybe family isn't always blood. Maybe it's who shows up when others don't. The next week came faster than I expected. Between work and cooking, I barely had time to think. But for once I didn't mind. The apartment smelled of roasted herbs and lemon. Candles flickered on the table. I'd borrowed mismatched plates from neighbors, set them around a wooden table that had seen too many quiet nights. Tonight, it wouldn't be quiet. My friends started trickling in. Co-workers, old college friends, even my neighbor who'd helped me carry groceries once. They laughed as they came through the door, bringing warmth and noise with them. For the first time in months, the air felt alive. The laughter didn't echo like emptiness anymore. It filled the room. Dinner began simply. Shared stories, clinking glasses, laughter spilling over between bites. I didn't realize how much I'd missed this feeling. Belonging. There were no expectations, no traditions to follow. No one watching to make sure we sat in the right place. Just connection. And then, halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed on the counter. Dad's name. I froze. The table went quiet for a beat, sensing my hesitation. One of my friends smiled softly. You should answer. We've got this covered. I stepped into the kitchen and picked up. Hey, Dad. There was a pause, long enough for me to hear him breathe. Your aunt told me you stopped by, he said finally. His voice sounded smaller than I remembered. She also told me what she told you. I waited. I shouldn't have lied, he admitted quietly. It wasn't fair, I didn't want you to see how empty the house feels without your mom. I thought if I kept things the same dinner, the same toasts, I could pretend she was still here. But when I looked at you, I saw how much she's gone. And it hurt. So I pushed you away. I leaned against the counter, eyes stinging. You didn't have to protect me, Dad. You just had to be honest. He sighed. I know. I'm sorry. His voice cracked a little, and for the first time in years, it didn't sound like the father I'd known. The one who barked orders and held grudges. It sounded like a man who'd finally let himself be human. Dinner's happening here, I said after a pause. It's not Thanksgiving or any holiday, but you're welcome to join. There was silence. Then, maybe next time, he said softly. But thank you. When I hung up, I didn't feel angry or empty anymore. Just peaceful. I returned to the table, and my friends raised their glasses, not asking what the call was about. They didn't need to. We toasted to new beginnings, to chosen family, to healing that doesn't need permission. As laughter filled the room again, I looked around and realized I hadn't lost tradition. I'd just redefined it. And maybe, one day, Dad would find his way to this table too. The days that followed felt strangely light, like a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying had finally slipped off my shoulders. For the first time in years, the silence in my apartment wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. I'd started to notice small things again. The way sunlight caught the dust in the air. The way laughter from the neighbors seeped through the walls. Life hadn't changed much, but I had. A week later, I got another message from Dad. Just a photo this time, of the old dining table, set for two. His message read, "Made Mom's casserole. Thought you'd like to know." That was all. But somehow it meant everything. No apologies. No explanations. Just a quiet bridge being built. One simple act at a time. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the photo for a long time, tracing every familiar object in the background. The worn-out curtains, the crooked painting Mom loved, the vase she always filled with daisies. For once, it didn't hurt to see it. It felt like remembering, without breaking. Over the next few weeks, Dad and I exchanged small messages. Nothing deep, just light conversation about the weather, the dog, or a new recipe he tried. But each text felt like another stone laid on that bridge. We didn't rush to rebuild what we'd lost. We just kept showing up, in little ways. And one afternoon, I got a call. Dad again. "I know it's not a holiday," he said, "but I made too much food. Thought you might want to stop by." His tone was tentative, like a man learning how to ask without expecting. I smiled before answering. "Yeah, Dad, I'd like that." When I hung up, I stood by the window for a while, watching the city move beneath me. Cars, people, moments, and for the first time, I realized that family doesn't disappear when it changes shape. It just grows new edges, softer and more forgiving. That night, I packed a small bag and headed out. Not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to. This time, it wasn't about keeping traditions alive. It was about starting ones that felt real. As I locked the door behind me, I whispered to the quiet room, "See you soon." And for the first time in a long while, I meant it. Dad's house looked exactly the same. The same porch light, the same creak on the front step. But walking up to it this time felt different. There was no resentment, no fear, just quiet acceptance. He opened the door before I even knocked. For a second, we just looked at each other. The distance that had stretched between us for months, maybe years, seemed to shrink in that silence. Then he smiled, a small uncertain smile, and stepped aside. "Come in, kiddo." The smell of Mom's casserole filled the air, warm and nostalgic. It hit me harder than I expected. Every memory seemed to rise with that scent. Laughter, holiday music, the soft hum of a home that once felt whole. But this time it didn't ache. It felt comforting. We sat at the table, the same one from that photo he'd sent. 2 plates, 2 forks, a vase with daisies in the middle. He caught me looking at it and said quietly, "She'd want us to keep this going." We ate mostly in silence. But it wasn't the heavy kind. Every few minutes, one of us would say something small. About a recipe, a memory, a story Mom used to tell. Each word felt like stitching together pieces of something we thought was gone for good. After dinner, he poured us both coffee and leaned back in his chair. "You were right," he said, voice soft. "Traditions aren't about control. They're about connection." I forgot that for a while. I smiled. We both did. He nodded, eyes glistening just a little. "Next time, you pick the tradition." I laughed. "Deal." As I drove home that night, the streets glowed under soft lamplight. The city felt warmer somehow, like it had let out a sigh of relief right along with me. I realized that family isn't a fixed shape. It bends, it breaks, it heals. What matters is that it keeps reaching for light, even after the dark. When I got back to my apartment, the candles from last week's dinner were still on the table. I lit one again, not for tradition, but for peace, for new beginnings, for love that learns to start over.